So last week we started this new Lent series based upon Dave Bookless's book, Planetwise. And Jim set the scene last week with Genesis chapter 1, the creation of God's very good world. This week we must confront the reality of the world from Genesis 3 onwards. Barely a page or two into our Bibles, something happens. A few things before we get to that. I have found this a very difficult message to prepare. I've wavered between wanting to paint an accurate picture of the state of the world as it is today and not making this so heavy that you are all weeping into your coffee cups by the end. I am aware that when we leave here, we have to go about our daily lives. We will cook our Sunday lunches and we will do the household chores and maybe the ironing. But I don't want to waste this opportunity to make us think, perhaps to feel a little uncomfortable, and to talk about some things we actually don't often speak about in church. I do want us to remember we are people who have hope, and we will hear about hope in the weeks ahead. But we cannot skip straight to the good news. Because when it comes to the health of the planet and the possible outcomes of the state we find ourselves in, environmental scientists agree that we are in serious trouble. I also don't want to steal the thunder of the speakers who will follow in the future weeks. So there might be some points at which you feel like I've left things a bit unfinished, and that is fully intentional. So what did happen in Genesis 3? God placed his two chosen humans, the Adam, the human, and the woman, Eve, which means life, in a wonderful habitat that he had made them fit for. He gave them meaningful work to do. He gave these two people the dignity of being made in the image of their Creator, and he gave them responsibility to care for the earth and for all the other living creatures to whom God, remember, had also given the breath of life. Just one thing was off limits, one thing. They were not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. To take the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil would mean to take into their own hands the means of gaining wisdom and knowledge about the world. The tragedy is that God would have shown them and taught them about this, but they just had to believe that he had their best interests at heart and he would supply what they needed to know at the right time. God placed limits on humans in his goodness and wisdom, and this was for their protection and their good. But they overreached. And when faced with the test, the temptation to seize control and shortcut the route to knowledge was just too enticing. We don't have time today to go into many important questions, such as the identity of the snake, or where he came from, or the problem of where evil came from, or the various ways in which one can faithfully marry the Genesis account with our current scientific understanding of the origins of mankind. But all of this is very important and fascinating and worth many productive discussions. But today we're focusing on the effects of what happened in Genesis 3 on the wider creation. Because from the moment that the man and the woman chose to ignore the limits that God had placed on them and disregarded his instruction, something changed. God said that Adam and Eve would surely die if they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But when they eat of it, they don't immediately drop dead. So what did happen? Did God lie? Was the snake right? Well, something clearly did happen. Their eyes were somehow opened and their innocence was lost. They are self-conscious. They're aware of their nakedness. They feel shame. Their innocence is gone. Consider that in the garden, there were two trees. There was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and there was also the tree of life. After the fall, God prevented the humans accessing the tree of life, and that seems to have also been for their own protection, that they would not be permanently stuck in the state they then found themselves in. And I found this a helpful thing to think about, that whilst I do not believe that physical death was a result of the fall. You can debate with me about this afterwards, but scientifically I don't think that can align with how I see the world. I think spiritual death entered at the fall. But there's also a sense in which there was another level of life that we perhaps were meant to attain, that we were then prevented from accessing, eating the tree of life. And I think it also helps us to understand a little what Jesus says when he says he has come that we may have life in all its fullness. But that I don't want to steal thunder from perhaps Mark and others later in the series when we think more about these things. We often focus most on the effects of Adam and Eve's disobedience on the relationship between God and man, and perhaps between the man and the woman, and humans in general. And we quickly see after the events in the garden that murder, lying, arrogance, strife all follow very quickly. But perhaps we reflect less on the other relationships that were fractured, including that between God and his creation, and between mankind and the natural world. And as I've been thinking about this over the last few weeks, I keep coming back to one verse which just goes round in my head. Cursed is the ground because of you. Now note in Genesis 3, God pronounces a curse upon the snake and upon the ground. He doesn't specifically curse man or woman, but his judgment on the ground makes the life of the man and the woman much more difficult, painful, and frustrating. The creation itself is subjected to futility and frustration. In the Planetwise book, Dave Bookless writes, because of humanity's ongoing rejection of God, there is now a cancer at work within creation, causing pain and destruction from the inside. Sin has entered the human heart, causing an inner battle between good and evil, like that between healthy and cancerous cells. In the early chapters of Genesis, we see the steady increase of evil and conflict within the small human population of the day. And things come to a head at the Tower of Babel. Humans are trying by then to elevate themselves to a godlike status, building a tower that attempts to reach the heavens, overreaching their limits. The flood follows and is a judgment on the multiplication of evil on earth. But it seems that sin and evil are still lurking like metastatic cancer cells in the heart of humans, just ready to multiply again as soon as the remnant of Noah's family touches dry ground again. I think it's worth considering that our human sin extends to sin against the natural world and against our fellow creatures. We sin against our ecosystems. And the bigger the human population has become, and the more advanced our technology has become, the more devastating the impact of our actions can be. When we were hunter-gatherers and small-scale subsistence farmers, we could do relatively little damage. Even if we took more from the natural resources of the earth than we needed and polluted the ground with waste, the size of the global population was not enough to completely disrupt the ecosystem. Again and again, we can see examples of where we've used our God-given intelligence and our creativity to accomplish things that seem to be a great idea initially, but then have devastating effects down the line. We repeatedly confirm our tendency to choose our own wisdom over the wisdom of our Father. Now we have devised methods of intensive animal rearing that satisfy our desire for cheap meat and fast food, and this causes suffering to millions of creatures, as well as the destruction of habitats to provide space to grow animal feed. We've realised that intensively farmed animals need antibiotics to prevent diseases that arise from living in unnaturally cramped conditions, as well as to make them grow much faster and fatter, and this results in the rise of multi-drug resistant bacteria that now threaten the health of people across the globe. We've cut down rainforests to clear land for growing cash crops and animal feed, and also for the furniture, construction, and paper industries. And this leads to irreversible loss of biodiversity, rates of species extinction that far exceed the natural rates we'd expect, and additional consequences such as increased flooding, droughts, landslides, and wildfires. We've learned to manufacture and throw away huge quantities of consumer goods many constructed from materials that will not degrade and are destined to end up in landfill sites. We can buy clothing that's been very cheaply made on the other side of the globe by people who we never meet in conditions that would make us feel ashamed if we actually saw them. We've invented weapons of mass destruction and instruments of war that can wreak havoc on other humans and destroy natural habitats with equal efficiency. War destroys habitats, pollutes air, water, and soil. And we even now find it necessary to store deterrent nuclear weapons that have the potential to wipe our entire species from the face of the earth. Cursed is the ground because of you. Our spiritual overreaching results in a condition called environmental overshoot. And even the world's economies are built on a principle that it must continue to grow. We must always make more, sell more, and this is just simply unsustainable. Now, we might, with some justification, say that we are not ourselves running intensive cattle farms or clothing sweatshops or logging companies, but we've still bought the stuff, and we've still thrown it away. And we've driven the cars and eaten the food, and enjoyed the electricity from burning the fossil fuels. And we've sometimes turned a blind eye to those things that are a bit too uncomfortable to think about. At this point, there are probably 3 common mistakes we can make. The first would be to deny it's a problem at all. It's said there are 7 stages of climate denial. It's not real. Maybe it's real, but it's not us. Perhaps it's not that bad. We've still got time to fix it. It's too expensive to fix it. Here's a fake solution. It's too late. You should have warned us earlier. Or perhaps we can instead resort to escapism. This is probably quite a common temptation, particularly in Christian circles. We can reassure ourselves and each other that perhaps none of this matters too much because we're looking forward to eternity with God in heaven. We're going to escape. But that's theologically also incorrect, because Jesus taught us that the kingdom of heaven is here amongst us now, and we are not trying to escape earth and get to heaven. We are looking forward to a time when heaven comes to the new earth. And if the kingdom of God is already here, how does that change the way we think about our responsibility to the creation around us? A third temptation we have is to actually feel despair. We can feel hopeless, and we can feel that there's nothing we can do to make this any better. And if you do feel this, please be reassured that this is common and understandable. But don't get stuck here, because there are many things, in fact, we can do. So I want to suggest 3 things I think would be helpful actions. The first is actually to lament. Yes, we are called to be a people who have hope, but I do not think we should avoid the painful reality of what humans have done to the earth. And if we are not currently suffering as a result of climate change, then we should consider that there are people who are suffering now, and we too likely will in the future as well. And if not us, our children and their children. And the hard truth is that the poorest people on earth, who've perhaps been least involved in the creation of the problem, are the first to suffer the consequences. By 2050, if I live that long, I'll be 71, almost 25% of the Vietnamese population, that's 20 million people, will be living on land that's underwater at least once a year. Other cities most at risk from sea level rise include Kolkata, Mumbai, Ho Chi Minh City, Shanghai, Bangkok, and Miami. And this won't just impact other nations. In the UK, there will be significant parts of the country that will be underwater, including parts of the English coastline and rivers, such as in Sussex, Kent, Cambridgeshire, and central London. By 2050, the UK will see a trebling of heat-related deaths, with about 7,000 people dying due to excess heat each year. Jesus commanded us to love our neighbour. So who is our neighbour? When we know that there are people suffering the effects of rising sea levels, of flooding, of wildfires, and of heat waves that are connected to our collective actions, what should our response be? So the second thing we can do is to educate ourselves about the reality of the situation and contemplate our individual responsibility. The purpose of the Paris Agreement of 2016 was to try and limit the average global temperature rise to less than 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. Now, even this degree of warming, if we can limit it to that, will come with serious problems. But at the moment, we're not even on course to prevent a 2-degree rise, which is likely to be seen by 2060 or maybe sooner. Now, if this disaster is to be averted or even mitigated, there needs to be some kind of very urgent action on a global scale, which would require unprecedented levels of cooperation, creativity, collaboration between governments and nations. Individual action alone will not be enough, but individual action is still very important. The collective momentum of many small changes in different areas does matter. And if nothing else, it shows that we understand that the issue of climate change and creation care is a moral and spiritual issue, and it demands a personal response. Perhaps we also need to consider that those of us with the most options and the most choice carry more responsibility for how we use that freedom. There are many millions of our global neighbours who have very little choice over the food they eat, or the fuel they burn, or the type of work they have to do. But if we do have a choice, we are both blessed and held more accountable. Jesus said, "From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who's been entrusted with much, much more will be asked." And I've been thinking this week about how that applies to this particular area. Now, the third step is a bit more positive. You're all looking very sad at this point. Okay, reconnect with nature. There is still so much beauty and wonder in our world. It is difficult to love that which we do not experience. And we're not motivated to protect something until we feel a connection to it. Our modern lives mean that we are increasingly disconnected from the natural world. And we can easily forget that we don't exist independently of the rest of creation. We are all intricately connected in the web of life. So spend time outdoors. Follow Jesus' lead and observe the wild flowers and the birds and the passing of the seasons. Look up at the stars at night. And if you can't easily get outside, then watch Attenborough's Blue Planet or Green Planet or Spring Watch. By slowing down and taking time to see the hand of our Creator in the world around us, we can rediscover a right posture of humility, of reverence and worship, and we can reconsider the mandate that God gave us to be responsible stewards of his good creation. Because the heavens still declare the glory of God, and we would do well to listen. In closing, I'm going to read over you a Gaelic blessing. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. Deep peace of the shining stars to you. Deep peace of the gentle night to you. Moon and stars pour their healing light on you. Deep peace of Christ, the light of the world to you. Deep peace of Christ to you. May God, who established the dance of creation, who transforms chaos to order, lead us and empower us to transform our lives, the witness of the church, and the governments of nations, so that all might preserve and reflect the glory of God revealed in creation. Amen.